Welcome to the American Academy of Grief Counseling's videogram on the role of the funeral and death rituals. Now, funerals and death rituals are very important to cultural, social, and religious aspects of human life itself. They have two primary purposes, though. They have a social, personal recognition of the death, and secondly, the spiritual process for the deceased. Usually, though, the funeral, especially in regards from a psychological standpoint, have more of a benefit for the living, the deceased, to process and recognize the loss itself. Now, various different religions have different post-death rituals. Christianity has last rites, which are for the purpose of the dying, and then following that, the funeral and the wake. Now, within certain Christian traditions, especially Catholicism, there is a funeral mass, which would have some benefit for the spiritual aspect of the dying person. But for the most part, the funeral and then the wake or the gathering after the funeral has more meaning for the family, the deceased themselves in dealing with it. In Judaism, after the burial, there's the custom of the Shiva, which can be 3 or 7 days, depending on traditional or reformed status within the Jewish religion. In Islam, the funeral is immediate, but the body itself is not viewed, and a wake may follow with a 40-day period of mourning. In Hinduism, there is a viewing of the deceased followed by cremation, and there is a 10 to 30 days of mourning that looks to aid the soul to reincarnate. Now, again, emphasizing the social importance from a psychological standpoint that plays for the bereaved, because as grief counselors and those in pastoral care, we are no longer dealing with the deceased, but we are attempting to help the deceased's family process the loss in a healthy way. So the death rituals that follow and the funeral itself, they all give a chance for the public to grieve with each other, to share stories, to also celebrate life. Sometimes funerals are reframed to be called life celebrations, so that the remembrance of the deceased can be in a different light, a more positive light, where there can be some laughter mixed with the sadness itself. It also gives others a chance to express condolences and also to check in on other family members who might be grieving at a different trajectory or in a more complicated trajectory that is not healthy in itself. So this event should be for the entire family, and children should never be excluded. Many times we think we're shielding children from the grave and cold reality of life, but they are part of life and they need to start experiencing it in doses. And learning how to grieve properly, being able to express their grief in a healthy fashion is important in their development itself. Now, after the funeral, this is where grief counselors and pastoral caregivers really need to be focused, because this is when the bereaved are forgotten. Secondary family members, not the immediate friends or acquaintances, soon forget the funeral after a week or so. But for the bereaved, the post-funeral grieving period has just begun, and it's the most difficult, because now everything begins to settle in. The reality of existence begins to manifest. And there is that pain of being reminded of the loss wherever one goes because of that absence. Many friends may start to become awkward with an individual who is grieving and not know how to discuss. So, how they check in, whether they do it properly or improperly, or entirely avoid, begins to become an issue for the individual, because the individual is still grieving, but they're no longer receiving flowers. They're no longer receiving cards. They're no longer being checked on as much. And this happens especially with casual friends or other groups that used to hang out with you, maybe with that particular individual who was deceased, but now because that person is deceased, you no longer see this particular group of individuals. So new secondary losses will also begin to emerge. If one was married, what type of duties did this individual perform for the house? What type of career did they have? What type of financial security was there as long as that paycheck of that individual was coming in? So new roles emerge with new problems for the deceased, and these are referred to as secondary losses, and they need to be faced. But sometimes it's very difficult to face these types of problems when dealing with grief itself. Following the funeral, new rituals may emerge. Visits to the grave may or may not become part of a new tradition for a particular bereaved individual. Some it might be too painful for the first year. Others might make it an annual event or on special days visit to go and connect with the loved one. Again, it is critically important after the funeral for pastoral care to continue through grief counseling, or if within ministry, to check on widows or widowers or individuals who have experienced loss, to cross that boundary of awkwardness, just to check and see how someone is doing. If you don't know what to say, then do something. Do something kind, do something nice for these types of individuals, because one of their biggest pains and sorrows is not just losing their loved one, but being forgotten. And sometimes as a society, we think not talking about it might make it go away. But the reality is it's not going away for these individuals. They're still suffering, and that silence is sometimes the loudest thing that they suffer from. We are the American Institute of Healthcare Professionals. We offer a variety of certifications that deal with grief and funerals and pastoral care. We have a funeral associate certification below, a pastoral thanatology certification, as well as a grief counseling certification. Our email is info@aihcp.org, and our phone number is 330-652-7776. So let's not forget the bereaving. Let's remember them, not just only in our thoughts, but also in our words and our actions. I'd like to thank you for listening, and have a good day.